Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Freedom Project stream. And I would like to welcome Miss Rose Parker. Uh, Good evening, ma'am. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm good as well. So, a little bit about Miss Rose. She is a BSc in psychology with honors, and she's currently going to begin her clinical mental health MA in the fall of this year. Uh, and she also runs the Instagram channel Psychosis Positivity, which has garnered over 10,000 followers. And good evening, ma'am. So, how has it been, with the Instagram channel, and how have you, started to spread awareness about mental health?
The Instagram channel I have been running for a while. It actually started as a page on Tumblr, but I eventually switched to Instagram, and it started to get really serious after I started working at the NGO Students with Psychosis. Students with Psychosis was founded by the psychosis advocate Cecilia McGow. She's a very good friend of mine, and I also work for her. Um, at Students with Psychosis, we do community peer support among people in undergrad and graduate school with psychotic disorders and conditions. And we're hoping to expand into other forms of psychosis advocacy. For me, I've taken this journey of posting about my ideas about psychosis and turned it into really trying to learn as much as I can about psychotic conditions and psychotic people and our experiences, and trying to put them into words that loved ones and clinicians and just people on the street can understand the psychotic experience, because it's something that's really hard for most people with psychosis to articulate. And my goal has been to become a clinician, a licensed professional counselor. It's a licensure in the United States for therapy, working exclusively
Yeah.
with psychotic and schizophrenic people, and to continue to be an advocate for professional education and protection of the civil rights of people with psychosis.
Yes, definitely. And we wish you all the best for that journey and to reach that point you were trying to reach and to achieve what you want to do. Yes. So if we, begin with the questions, uh, so like our audiences or the people viewing are not generally accompanied, or they're not, familiar with the term psychosis, right? So can you give us a brief context about psychosis?
Psychosis describes detachment from the reality. It stems from organic dysregulation, dysfunction in the brain. Generally, when this happens in the context of a disorder, there's dysregulation in neurotransmitters, dopamine, glutamate, serotonin. There's also usually changes in brain structure, loss of white matter and gray matter, changes in the limbic system. As in terms of how a person acts when they have psychosis, they experience hallucinations such as seeing shadow figures or hearing voices that sound external to the head or like a second stream of consciousness. They might have delusions such as believing that God is talking to them and giving them instructions, or believing that other people are out to get them. They might have what is known as thought disorder, which is a broad category of symptoms that involve just disorganized behavior and speech. So their pattern of speech might get messed up, or they might behave very erratically and in a confused manner. Psychotic people are stereotyped as dangerous, and this isn't really true. Most dangerous behavior that happens in people with psychosis happens in the first episode when they are unmedicated, and other than that, most people with psychosis who do continue to be dangerous after they have received a diagnosis and treatment have high levels of psychopathy, which is just linked to criminality in general across demographics. So it's not really a psychosis thing, it's just a personality thing. Um, and
Yeah. Yeah.
psychosis can also come with what are called negative and cognitive symptoms. So
Okay.
cognitive symptoms are issues of thinking and doing things like reading and writing. And negative symptoms are things like fatigue, problems of hygiene, and other issues with talking and experiencing pleasure or happiness. That was a bit
Oh,
long-winded. I apologize.
no, no. So yeah, so this was a in-depth, I think, scientific reason of why or and what is psychosis. Definitely. So uh, our viewers can, uh, view it and get to know a few terms. So could you, explain a few terms that you used in psychosis? Like, how is psychosis related? Like you used dopamine. So most of the people, might be relative or they might be knowing what is dopamine. It's like a pleasure sensory
Dopamine
something.
is what's called an excitatory neurotransmitter. It makes things happen. Um, what what happens in psychosis is you get too much of that, and it can cause the hallucinations, the delusions, because the nerves are in the brain are overstimulated. But what's interesting is in schizophrenia, the most famous psychotic disorder, but by no means the only one, um, is parts of the brain and the prefrontal cortex have too much dopamine, but other parts of the brain don't have enough. And the parts of the brain where the dopamine is blocked, that's where you get things like poverty of speech and lack of the ability to experience pleasure. And you get in the parts of the brain where you have too much, that's where you get the hallucinations and the delusions. The medication for schizophrenia blocks the too much dopamine, but this can become very dangerous because they can block dopamine to an extreme extent. And then you can start getting symptoms that are known as Parkinsonian symptoms because they mimic the neurodegenerative disorder Parkinson's, the dementia, or dementia with Lewy bodies is sometimes called. And people can get things like paralysis or facial muscle spasms or other things. Personally, I developed episodes of paralysis of the face. I had a couple of trips to the emergency room where I had to get my face unstuck. I'm on medication for it now. It's a medication for Parkinson's. It's a medication generally elderly people take, but it's to counteract the over effectiveness of my antipsychotics in some parts of my brain and body, because they work okay in other parts of my body, but they're over effective in others. So it's a very primitive science in some ways.
Oh, so yeah, so like you're saying is you're not reached, like we have not reached the pinnacle of psychosis or detecting or curing or treating psychosis in the matter that we would
Yeah,
have with some other medicines such as cough, cold, right?
yeah, the medications for psychosis are still very basic. We don't have medications that can adequately treat the negative or the cognitive symptoms, and many people do not respond at all or completely to the medications that treat the positive symptoms. And the medications that do treat the positive symptoms have long lists of side effects that range from the metabolic. They can cause metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes, or over 100 pounds of weight gain is not uncommon. And they have the neurological side effects, like I described, are called extrapyramidal side effects. And some people have hormonal side effects beyond what um, I've described, like enlargement of the breast. Um, Yeah. Um, I'm not against the medication. I don't want people to think that. It can, for some people, it's life altering and gives them their lives back. For some people, it's useful, especially when combined with things like cognitive behavioral therapy. That's my case. But I don't believe in forcing people to take the medication. I
Yes,
believe it should be a choice done with the consultation of a of a learned clinician.
yes, definitely. So again, what I would like to reiterate to our audiences: do not self-medicate and do not take medication based on what someone else tells you. Refer to a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist who is who has the degree or who has the general know-how to give you what medication you require. And
Yes, always refer to your doctor.
yes, definitely. So I would like to move on to my next question. Is what are a few early warning signs of psychosis, and how do you detect them, or how do you detect psychosis experiences in children and young people or the youth?
No, this is a difficult one. Many of us in my community were diagnosed with schizophrenia, psychosis as an adult. But looking back, we realized we had it much, much earlier, either in a prodromal form or even in full fledged psychosis. And for me personally, I knew I had psychosis at a young age, but I wasn't able to get help. And for me, I would often say things that people considered odd or strange. I would ask questions about that didn't make sense. And people often just brushed it off because I was kind of a weird kid. But there were a variety of things, I was socially stunted, and kids who do go on to develop schizophrenia are often stunted in terms of social development, language development. They'll often have issues with crawling and walking. Um,
Yeah.
but for me, the biggest one seems to be that I've noticed as a trend is social development being stunted. And for me, the what I wish people had picked up on was the strange things I said and did. And instead of attributing that to me being weird or me trying to be difficult, it's wondering why I was actually doing that.
Yes, definitely. So, so if people are not aware of what is happening, they cannot put a pin or put a finger on what is going wrong, or they just generally brush it off as oh, she's weird or he's weird, or they talk that way only. And
Mm.
no one's ready to understand that there is a deeper underlying cause that is trying to or that is at the forefront of their mind, and we have to talk about it. We have to get them to accept and talk about it,
Yeah, and
right?
like as a teenager, when it was getting more pronounced, there's a couple incidents that come to my mind that my mom really ignored that she shouldn't have. Like I remember my room was in absolute chaos, and my mom was getting mad at me, and she said, "What, Rose? Why is your room such a mess? You can't live like this." And I said, "The chaos in my room reflects the chaos in my mind." And she just looked at me and left. And I think she kind of should have taken that one as a warning sign. And
Yes,
I made several comments to her about not having the will to live as a teenager, and I made several comments that she made clear she interpreted at least somewhat as suicide threats, but she never acted on them as she never took them seriously. She just treated them like I was being dramatic. And this was back in the early 2010s, so mental health wasn't as people weren't as aware of it then. But I feel like some
yes.
people just choose not to see.
Yes, definitely. It feels like there are some mental health topics that you can just brush down the carpet, and suddenly it'll get all well. It's like you can do something, and then you can give the hint, so you can say it out loud to a person, but still they are in their own frame of mind that, oh, there's nothing such as this, or they have grown out in a different time and they don't know how to react to it, or they don't know what society will think of them, or the stigmas that are associated with, and they just try to brush it down the carpet. And they like the children, once they grow up they'll deal with it. And I don't think they understand the gravitas of the situation, and how they can improve their children's lives or the people around theirs, right? So I feel it definitely starts with awareness. And compared to what we were 15 years ago, definitely I feel we've come to a different point in mental health where we are currently than what we were in a few years ago. Even a few years ago, if you go down back like 6 7 years ago, mental health wasn't talked about that much. and people weren't in that time frame or in that mindset to talk about mental health. Yes, definitely. Um, so if we move on to our next question, so my next question to you is, what is the role of drugs in amplifying psychosis or reducing psychosis?
Several street drugs can worsen psychosis or trigger episodes. Marijuana can trigger psychotic episodes in people who are genetically vulnerable. Um,
Okay.
it's one thing that irritates me with marijuana increasingly becoming legal in the United States. People like to extol its virtues, and there are many legitimate medical uses for marijuana. I'm
Yes.
not undermining that, but there are a significant number of people who are genetically vulnerable. If I remember correctly, I read somewhere it's like 25%,
Yes.
but don't quote me on that.
Yes. Definitely.
Um, I can't remember the source. Um, but there
Yes.
are a significant number of people who carry the genes that make them genetically vulnerable for marijuana. And if you get unlucky, it can begin to trigger psychosis. And um, that worries me because I have met people who have been triggered into psychosis from marijuana use in my time in psychosis advocacy. So it's something I want to do more reading about. I haven't gotten around to it because I need to do a lot of reading on it. But another thing is hallucinogenics can also trigger long-lasting psychosis. What happens what happens is with hello? Okay, I think we need to re-record that.
No, I'm here. I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
And
It just went to me for a while and I kind of stopped talking.
yeah, yeah. So that was no issue. I just, I got you to the whole screen to
Okay, well I
talk
stopped
about.
talking so because I got confused.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm going to re-record the marijuana part because since I can't remember where I got that statistic, I don't want to quote it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. You can. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, well, yeah, marijuana can trigger psychotic episodes. I don't remember what percentage of people are genetically vulnerable, but there is a percentage, and they and it can happen. Now, marijuana does have many legitimate medical uses, and I don't want to undermine that, but it does concern me when I see the number of young people that think smoking marijuana is just so casual and fun when it can actually be dangerous. And hallucinogenics can cause refractory psychosis. They can cause psychotic episodes that pop up for long term after the use of the hallucinogenic. You can continue having a bad trip, so to speak, for
Yeah.
months afterwards. Drug induced psychosis is not my area of specialty, but I have met several people in my advocacy who have had psychosis from marijuana and hallucinogenics. It's something I need to put more time into researching and learning about because it's something I'm sure I will run into more in my work. But drugs in treating psychosis, yes, there are quite a few. The most common class would be antipsychotics. There's been debate over the role of lithium in working as an antipsychotic. Currently, they're looking into glutamate um, um, anti drugs, blood drugs that increase the role of glutamate um, to treat negative and cognitive symptoms, since glutamate underperformance is indicated as a possible cause of those. Um, Glutamate agonists, that's the right word. But
Oh,
um, mood stabilizers and antidepressants can play a secondary role in treating psychosis if you have a major mood disorder with psychotic features, because in a major mood disorder with psychotic features, the psychosis is tied to the extreme ends of the mood. So if you stabilize a mood, you can stabilize the psychosis. Like in the treatment of major depression with psychotic features, they often start the person on antipsychotics and an antidepressant. Then after the person is stabilized, they remove the antipsychotic and they just keep the antidepressant, because if the mood is stabilized, the psychosis does not return.
Yes. Oh, so that was a bit, that, went brushed past my head. But I did definitely understand a little bit about that. And I think even our audiences will have. Uh, so basically, what you're saying is like, the common drugs that are currently being legalized, like marijuana. And so it's genetically wired into our system that either you can tolerate marijuana or you cannot.
Yeah, and
And
most people can tolerate it, but there's some unlucky people who are at risk, and it's not always if you have an immediate family member you're at risk versus you're not. It's a bit more tricky than that, which is what has me worried with so many young people doing it.
yes, definitely. And so yeah, not everyone has a family member or an emergency contact, like you said. And if sometimes, taking marijuana might, increase or prolong that effect that of psychosis or anxiety, depending on what either strain, if you call it, or the type of weed that you consume, or it can also depend on the amount of THC and CBD that is there in the strains of the cannabis, right? So, but yeah, so these drugs, so basically marijuana. So if you're watching from the US, so one thing I would like to add a disclaimer here. So if you try marijuana for the first time or anywhere in the world, if you're listening to this, so if you try marijuana for the first time, have someone with you, have an emergency contact, and so if like you're not 100% sure, there's no way to find out how you get psychosis related to marijuana, right, Rose?
As far as I know now.
Yes. So what we should do is, if you're trying it out, have someone present with you who will be able to understand what you're going through, or will be able to at least, take you to a hospital or take you to the ER when it's needed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's move on to my next question. So people who've reported having, so my question is related to PTSD. So people who have reported having PTSD at some point in their lifetime, excuse me, also reported experiencing a positive psychosis symptom. So can you, elaborate a bit on that?
PTSD is an interesting disorder because the flashbacks themselves can have a hallucinogenic quality, and it can have full-on hallucinations as part of it. But trauma on its own, apart from PTSD, has been linked to the pathogenesis of basically every psychiatric disorder, including schizophrenia and psychosis. The reason they think trauma might be linked to the cause of psychosis is through the dissociation pathway, because if you when you dissociate, your mind sort of separates from what's going around you. So when you dissociate, and that gets sort of wired into you, so your own thoughts you might detach yourself from your own thoughts, and then you might hear your own thoughts as being separate from you. So
Mhm.
that and you might detach yourself from like thoughts that are going on in the background, and it might take on a delusional quality, that sort of thing. And apart from trauma, dissociation has been thought of as a method of um, psychosis in general. So
Yes.
um, it's
Okay.
really interesting, and there have been studies where they've studied specific types of childhood abuse and neglect, where different types of childhood trauma were linked to specific types of psychotic symptoms in adulthood in schizophrenic populations. So,
Oh,
um, there is a relationship, and it's quite interesting. And also, BPD. which is a personality disorder. It's not 100% based on trauma. Some people have it who don't have significant trauma, but most people who have it have trauma. In some populations, up to 50% of those people have psychosis. And BPD, one of the main mechanisms of the BPD works is dissociation. So it's all very curious.
Okay. So dissociation, as in, right, like you dissociate with reality completely, right? As in you dissociate with yourself, like you
Yeah,
said,
it's not like DID level of dissociation. It's a lower grade than that, but it's a dissociation to the level that you don't recognize your more subconscious thoughts, and then they seem alien to you, and that's how the hallucination forms. They see your thoughts
Oh,
become seen as separate because of the dissociation.
oh, oh. So that is something I knew I learned today. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, so if you dissociate with your own thoughts and you feel, you're thinking whatever you're thinking is from someone else, that basically amplifies psychosis, right?
Yeah,
And that is what psychosis is, right?
that might be
Oh,
how trauma relates to psychosis. That might be one way it plays a role.
yes, definitely. And I feel, or even like what we know is definitely there's a lot of research to be done yet in this field, and there's a few more concrete answers that we need, which will definitely come in the next few years once we start talking about mental health and we create the awareness that there is psychosis, that there is a condition called psychosis. It's just as similar as you get a cough or a cold. It can happen with anyone. It's nothing that is something that you have to take, or something bad might happen. It's genetic, right? It's something wired into your DNA, and it can go wrong at the end, like at any time. And definitely I feel awareness has to be created. um, like, so my last question to you, related to this topic, is so what would you like to share about positive psychosis with our audiences today?
Um, Positive psychosis. Do you mean positive symptoms or something positive about psychosis?
uh, so any way you like to interpret it, so it can be both or it can be either as well.
Okay. Um, hmm. Yeah, I'm going to kind of combine them. Just because an
Yeah.
experience is a hallucination or it is a delusion, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean it's inherently a dangerous thing. There are hallucinations and delusions that can be dangerous. If someone's in heavy psychosis, they do need monitoring, they do need treatment. But someone who's been experiencing psychosis for a while, who is able to function independently or semi-independently, who just experiences psychosis on the daily, like for me, I have a relatively constant delusion that I can talk to like plants, fungi, and inanimate objects, and I give them personalities and feelings and like volition. And you know, I've had some people try and spiritualize that and get insulted that I call it a delusion. The thing is, I don't spiritualize it. I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian, so it's not part of my religion. But um, for me, it's not less meaningful or lesser because it's a delusion. It's still a perfectly valid part of my world. It's just part of how my brain works, part of how I experience reality. For me, my brain acts this way. My brain acts this way. It's part of its genetics. It's how it developed. It's probably going to be with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
It's my brain is part of my body. It's it's
Yes,
it's
definitely.
inherently a part of me. Your brain is no less part of your body than your stomach or your liver. So,
Yes.
why should I dislike the way my brain works? Why should I demean the way my brain works? I see these colors floating and lights floating in front of my eyes all the time. I think they're quite beautiful. They create colors that don't exist in the real world. It's quite an interesting experience for me. I'm actually quite attached to it. Just because it's psychotic doesn't mean it's less valuable to me. It doesn't mean I don't cherish it. It's part of my existence. Psychosis has pushed me to the edge of life, but it's also made my life what it is. So I can have a nuanced experience with it. I've had very bad psychosis, but I've also found ways to adapt with it and live with it and find beauty in it. So you shouldn't treat someone's psychosis as this horrible, flawed, terrible thing. You shouldn't treat somebody's schizophrenia, their bipolar, as something to be gotten rid of. For me, treatment was most effective when I found a therapist who worked with my brain and taught me how to work with the brain I have instead of fighting to get it to fit into a mold. When treatment began, it taught me how to work with my brain and sort of go with the river instead of pushing up current, then I got better.
Yes, definitely. So I think everything that you shared with us today, and based on our experiences or based on our topics, what we understand is talking to someone or getting that help is the primary step, because you can't walk this difficult path alone. You need someone to guide you, and there are mental health professionals such as yourself who's going to guide people or guide us to that path wherein we embrace ourselves, we embrace our minds, and we know what is good for us and what we need to correct in order to become better versions of ourselves. um, yes, thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge with us today, and I would like to thank you once again for doing this. So one last question, is what message you would like to share with our audiences today? Anything that you would like to share?
Anything that I would like to share? Um, your psychotic loved one isn't, or patient, isn't trying to make things difficult for you. They care about you and they care about their lives, and they want to live, that they have and they want to live, they want to succeed in whatever it is they enjoy. They have a lot of trouble communicating. They have a lot of trouble expressing what's going on. Take the time to try to see things from their level, try and figure out how they communicate, and sit down with them and really try and listen, because these conditions make it really hard to express what's going on inside. And some of what we experience is really inexpressible. But it takes patience to work with people with this condition, and I know it's hard. But if you use patience and compassion, you'll get a lot farther than if you use like ultimatums or judgment.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. So, yes, definitely, judgment is not the way to go, and we shouldn't judge anyone for things that they can't control and something that is out of their hands. Definitely. Uh, So thank you so much again, and everybody. I would like to thank Ms. Rose Parker for joining us today. If you want to visit more about psychosis positivity, I will put the Instagram link in the description below. You can visit psychosis positivity to know about psychosis, to know about the topic, and to know how you can overcome such challenges while functioning properly in your daily life. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Miss Rose. And before we go, I would like to urge everyone to stay safe, sanitize wherever possible, follow the necessary precautions to prevent getting COVID 19 or spreading COVID 19, because we are in a tough situation today, and we would definitely like to come out of this situation. So thank you so much, everybody. And if you like this video, you can like in the comments below, or you can give us a comment where we would invite Miss Rose to give the answer to the question. And like it, if you feel someone else will benefit from this video, you can share it with the video, and you can definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great weekend, and thank you, Miss Rose.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you.